The day I turned 18, my foster parents told me I had 24 hours to pack my things and leave. Before we dive into what happened next, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow, I'm sharing a story that'll completely flip your perspective on family. You won't want to miss it. I'd lived with Richard and Patricia for 6 years. They weren't cruel people, just indifferent. I was placed with them when I was 12, after bouncing through 3 other foster homes. They had a nice house in the suburbs, 2 biological kids who were already grown and gone, and they fostered for the extra income. That's what my social worker never wanted to admit, but I figured it out pretty quickly. I wasn't family, I was a paycheck. The morning of my birthday, Patricia made pancakes. I thought maybe, just maybe, they were for me. But when I came downstairs, Richard was already eating them while reading the newspaper. Patricia was at the sink, her back to me. "Morning," I said. She turned around, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Morning, Maya. Happy birthday." The words felt rehearsed. Richard didn't even look up. "We need to talk to you after breakfast," Patricia added, and my stomach dropped. I'd been dreading this conversation for months. Once you age out of the system at 18, foster parents aren't obligated to keep you. Some do out of kindness, or because they've actually bonded with their foster kids. But I knew Richard and Patricia weren't those people. After Richard finished his pancakes and folded his newspaper, they both sat across from me at the kitchen table. Patricia did the talking. "Maya, now that you're legally an adult, we think it's time for you to start your independent life. We've been approved for a younger placement, a little girl who really needs a stable home. So we're going to need you to move out." I stared at her, waiting for something more. An apology, an acknowledgement that I'd lived under their roof for 6 years. Anything. Nothing came. "When?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We'd like you out by tomorrow," Richard said, finally meeting my eyes. "That gives you time to pack and make arrangements." 24 hours. 6 years compressed into 24 hours. I nodded because what else could I do? I went upstairs to my room, the smallest bedroom in the house, the one that had been a storage room before I arrived, and sat on the bed. I'd always kept my belongings minimal, a survival instinct from years of moving. Everything I owned fit into 2 suitcases and a backpack. I spent that afternoon packing mechanically, folding clothes and wrapping the few personal items I'd accumulated. A snow globe from a school field trip, a journal I'd kept since I was 14, a photograph of my biological mother that social services had given me years ago. She'd died when I was 8, and I had no other family, no father listed on my birth certificate, no grandparents or aunts or uncles who'd stepped forward. By evening, I was done packing. I sat on my bed and tried to figure out where I'd go. I had $300 saved from my part-time job at the grocery store. Not enough for rent anywhere, even with roommates. The local youth shelter was always full. I could sleep in my car, except I didn't have a car. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this Maya Rodriguez?" A man's voice, professional and formal. "Yes." "My name is Edward Sullivan. I'm an attorney here in town. I have some information regarding your late mother, Carmen Rodriguez. Would you be able to come to my office tomorrow morning?" My mother had died 10 years ago. What could a lawyer possibly want with me now? "What kind of information?" I asked. "I'd prefer to discuss it in person. It's regarding her estate. Can you come by at 10 o'clock? Her estate? My mother had been a single parent, working 2 minimum-wage jobs. She died owing money, not leaving any, but I had nowhere else to be. I'll be there. He gave me the address, and we hung up. I lay awake most of that night, wondering what this could possibly be about. Maybe there was some old debt I'd inherited. Maybe someone was suing the estate for something. My mind spiraled through worst-case scenarios. The next morning, I dragged my suitcases downstairs. Patricia was in the kitchen, making coffee. She turned when she heard me. "You're all set, then?" she asked, as if I were leaving for college instead of being forced out. "Yeah." "Good luck to you, Maya. I'm sure you'll do fine." Richard didn't even come out of his study to say goodbye. I called a taxi with my precious savings and gave the driver the address to Edward Sullivan's law office. It was in a brick building downtown, one of those old converted houses with a brass plaque by the door. I paid the driver, took a deep breath, and went inside. The receptionist smiled at me. "You must be Maya. Mr. Sullivan is expecting you. Go right in." His office was lined with law books and framed certificates. Edward Sullivan was probably in his 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood when I entered and shook my hand. "Thank you for coming, Maya. Please, sit down." I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, my backpack on my lap like a shield. "I'm sure you're confused about why I asked you here," he began. 10 years ago, your mother came to see me shortly before she passed away. She wanted to make sure her affairs were in order, and she left something for you." "My mother didn't have anything to leave," I said quietly. "That's what I thought at first, too. But your mother was more resourceful than you might have known." He pulled out a file folder and opened it. "She took out a life insurance policy about 6 months before she died. Nothing large, just enough to cover her funeral and leave a small amount for you. She specified that the money should be placed in a trust that you could only access when you turned 18. My heart started beating faster. "How much?" "After covering her funeral costs and legal fees, there's approximately $15,000. $15,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than I'd ever imagined having. It was enough for a security deposit on an apartment, enough to pay for community college for a year, enough to give me a real chance at starting over. But that's not all," Mr. Sullivan continued. He pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written on it in handwriting I recognized, my mother's. "She left this for you as well." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. I turned it over, afraid to open it, afraid of what emotional floodgates might open if I read my mother's words after 10 years. "Take your time," Mr. Sullivan said gently. "I'll step out and give you some privacy." After he left, I sat alone in that quiet office and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. I unfolded it and saw my mother's handwriting, those familiar loops and curves that I'd almost forgotten. "My dearest Maya," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just turned 18. I'm so sorry I won't be there to see the woman you've become. I'm sorry I won't be there to help you navigate all the challenges ahead. But I want you to know something important. You are not alone. You were never alone." And then, at the bottom of the page, was a single sentence that made no sense to me at all. "The blue house on Maple Street remembers you." That was it. No explanation, no context, just that one cryptic sentence. I read it over and over, trying to understand what it meant. The blue house on Maple Street? I didn't remember any blue house. I'd lived in apartments my whole childhood, never a house, and certainly nothing on Maple Street. Mr. Sullivan came back into the office. "Everything all right?" I showed him the letter. "Do you know what this means? The blue house on Maple Street?" He read it and frowned slightly. "I'm afraid your mother didn't share any details with me. She just asked me to give you this letter when you turned 18. Is Maple Street familiar to you?" I shook my head. "I've never lived on any street called Maple." "Well," he said thoughtfully, "there are several Maple Streets in this region. Perhaps it's something you'll need to investigate. In the meantime, let me get you set up with access to the trust fund." He spent the next hour explaining paperwork and having me sign documents. By the time I left his office, I had a cashier's check for $15,000 in my pocket and a mysterious sentence repeating in my head. I found a cheap motel for the night and spread out a map of the area. There were 4 different Maple Streets within a 30-mile radius. I had no idea where to start, but I had nothing but time and a mystery my mother had left me to solve. The first Maple Street was in a run-down neighborhood with no blue houses at all. The second was in a new development where all the houses were beige and identical. The third was in a retirement community where I got strange looks from the security guard. The fourth Maple Street was in a quiet town about 20 miles away called Riverside. I drove there on the 3rd day after leaving my foster parents, using some of my trust fund money to rent a car. Riverside was one of those small towns that looked like it had been frozen in time around 1975. The main street had a diner, a hardware store, and a post office. Trees lined the residential streets, their leaves golden in the early autumn light. I turned onto Maple Street and drove slowly, looking for anything blue. And then I saw it. Halfway down the block was a small house painted pale blue with white trim. It had a front porch with a swing and flower boxes in the windows, though the flowers had died some time ago. The lawn was overgrown, and there was a "for sale" sign in the front yard. I parked across the street and stared at it, trying to summon any memory of this place. Nothing came, but my mother's words echoed in my mind. "The blue house on Maple Street remembers you." I got out of the car and walked up to the front porch. Through the windows, I could see that the house was empty. I tried the doorknob, locked, of course. "Can I help you?" I jumped and turned around. An elderly woman was standing on the sidewalk, holding a small dog on a leash. She had white hair and sharp blue eyes that studied me with interest. "I'm sorry," I said. "I was just looking at this house." "Are you interested in buying it?" she asked, walking closer. "It's been on the market for over a year now. Terrible shame. It used to be such a lovely home." "Did you know the people who lived here?" "Oh, yes. Grace and Thomas Mitchell. They lived here for 40 years. Sweet couple. They both passed away within a few months of each other about 2 years ago. No children, no family to claim the place. So it went to auction. But nobody's bought it yet." "Did they ever have anyone else living here? Maybe a long time ago?" The woman tilted her head, thinking. "Well, Grace did do foster care for a while. Back in the 90s, I think. She had a few children come through. Why do you ask?" My heart was pounding. "What years exactly?" Oh, let me think. I believe she started around 1994 or 95 and did it for about 5 years. Are you looking for someone who stayed here? Maybe, I said. Do you remember any of the children? She thought for a moment. There was a little boy named Daniel. I remember him because he helped Thomas in the garden. And there were a few others, but they didn't stay long. Oh, and there was a baby girl. Well, a toddler, really. Carmen's daughter, I think her name was. Little Maya. She was here for about 6 months. Everything stopped. The world tilted. That was me, I whispered. I was here. The woman's eyes widened. Oh, my goodness. Are you Maya Rodriguez? I nodded, unable to speak. Oh, sweetheart, she said, her voice softening. Grace and Thomas talked about you for years. You were one of their favorites. They wanted to adopt you so badly. Tears started streaming down my face. I'd been here. I'd lived in this blue house with people who'd wanted to keep me, and I had no memory of it at all. What comes next is something I never saw coming. Stick with me and make sure you subscribe. Why didn't they adopt me? I managed to ask. The woman, she'd introduced herself as Dorothy, sighed. Your mother came back for you. She'd gotten herself together, found a stable job, and the state returned you to her custody. Grace and Thomas were heartbroken, but they were also happy for your mother. They hoped she'd stay in touch, let them be part of your life, but it never happened. They tried to find you over the years, but your mother had moved, and they hit dead ends. They wanted me, I repeated, the words not quite feeling real. They loved you, dear. Grace used to say you had the sweetest laugh, and Thomas taught you to love flowers. You'd follow him around the garden, and he'd let you help water the plants. That's when it hit me. The snow globe in my suitcase, the one I'd treasured for years, had a tiny garden inside it with a small house. I'd always loved that snow globe, but never knew why. Had it been a gift from Thomas? Is there any way I could get inside? I asked Dorothy. I know it sounds crazy, but my mother left me a note about this house, and I think there's something here I'm supposed to find. Dorothy studied me for a long moment. The realtor is my neighbor's daughter. Let me make a call. 20 minutes later, a young woman named Jennifer arrived with a key. Dorothy had explained the situation, and Jennifer seemed moved by the story. I remember Mrs. Mitchell mentioning you, Jennifer said as she unlocked the door. She kept a box of things in the house even after it went up for sale. Said if anyone ever came looking for Maya Rodriguez, they should have it. We thought it was just the ramblings of an elderly woman, but I guess she knew something we didn't. The house smelled musty from being closed up so long, but underneath that was something else. A scent I couldn't quite name, but that felt familiar. Jennifer led me through the living room to a small bedroom at the back of the house. This was the room she used for foster children, Jennifer said. The box is in the closet. I opened the closet door and saw a single cardboard box on the shelf, labeled Maya in careful handwriting. My hands shook as I lifted it down and set it on the floor. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, pictures of me as a tiny toddler, maybe 2 years old, laughing in a garden, sitting on Thomas's lap while he read to me, playing with blocks on the living room floor, sleeping in Grace's arms. There were also my drawings, childish scribbles that Grace had carefully saved, a handmade blanket with my name embroidered on it, a small wooden box that Thomas had apparently made with Maya's treasures carved into the lid, and at the very bottom was a letter addressed to me in Grace's handwriting. "Dear Maya," it began, "if you're reading this, then you've found your way back to us, just like I always hoped you would. Thomas and I loved you from the moment you came into our home. You were just 20 months old, so small and scared. Your mother was struggling, but she loved you fiercely. We understood why she couldn't keep you safe at that time, but we also saw how hard she was fighting to get you back. During those 6 months you were with us, you became the daughter we'd never had. We taught you to walk better, to talk in full sentences, to love flowers and books and music. You called us Gamma and Gampa, which melted our hearts every single time. When your mother was ready to take you back, we were devastated, but also happy for her. She promised to stay in touch, and we believed her, but life got in the way, and we lost contact. We tried to find you, but the system protected your privacy as it should have. Still, we never forgot you. Every year on your birthday, Thomas and I would have a little celebration, just the two of us, wondering where you were and hoping you were happy and loved. I'm writing this letter in 2009, and I'm 81 years old. Thomas passed away last month, and I know I don't have much time left. I wanted to leave you something, some proof that you mattered to us, that you were loved. The house is all we have to give. We've arranged for it to be placed in a trust with instructions that if Maya Rodriguez ever comes looking for us, the house should be transferred to her ownership at no cost. Our lawyer has all the details. This was your first home where you were truly safe and loved. We want it to be yours again if you need it. With all our love, Grace and Thomas Mitchell. I sat on the floor of that empty bedroom and sobbed. Not sad tears, but something more complicated. Grief and joy and loss and love all tangled together. Dorothy and Jennifer waited quietly, giving me space. When I finally composed myself, Jennifer handed me a business card. "This is the lawyer who's handling the Mitchell estate. Based on what I just heard, I think you should call him immediately. If Mrs. Mitchell set up that trust properly, this house might actually be yours." The next day, I was sitting in another lawyer's office. This one was younger than Mr. Sullivan, maybe in his 40s, and his name was Marcus. "I've been the Mitchell estate attorney for 3 years," Marcus explained. "And yes, Mrs. Mitchell did set up a specific trust for this property. The conditions were very clear. If Maya Rodriguez ever came forward with proof of identity before the year 2030, the house would be transferred to her free and clear of any liens or debts." "Why 2030?" I asked. "That would have been your 40th birthday," Marcus said gently. "She wanted to make sure you had time to find your way here, but she also set a deadline so the estate could be properly settled eventually." "And I just proved my identity?" "Birth certificate and state ID are sufficient, combined with the fact that you knew about the box and letter. Mrs. Mitchell was very specific about those details. She said only the real Maya would know to look for them." "So the house is mine." "It will be after some paperwork and a brief court process to validate the trust. Given the circumstances, I expect it'll take about 60 days. In the meantime, as the pending owner, you're welcome to stay in the house if you'd like. The utilities have been maintained by the estate." 60 days later, I stood in front of the little blue house on Maple Street with a set of keys in my hand and a deed with my name on it. I owned a house. At 18 years old, I owned an actual house. The first few months were overwhelming. I used part of my mother's trust fund to furnish the place with basics from thrift stores and garage sales. Dorothy became a surrogate grandmother, teaching me how to cook and maintain a house. Other neighbors welcomed me warmly, sharing stories about Grace and Thomas and treating me like I'd always belonged there. I enrolled in community college in Riverside, studying social work. After everything I'd been through, I wanted to help other kids in the foster system. I got a part-time job at the local library and started building a life that felt real and permanent for the first time ever. But I also spent time trying to understand my mother's journey. I found her old journals in a box I'd kept from our apartment, and I read them cover to cover. She'd written about how much she'd loved me, how hard she'd fought to get clean and stable so she could be my mother again. She wrote about Grace and Thomas with so much gratitude, knowing they'd kept me safe when she couldn't. And she wrote about getting sick, about knowing she was dying and being terrified of what would happen to me. She'd taken out that life insurance policy as a desperate attempt to give me something after she was gone. And she'd written that cryptic sentence in her letter as a breadcrumb, hoping that someday I'd be smart enough and brave enough to follow it back to the only people besides her who truly loved me. I found a photograph of Grace and Thomas in one of the boxes. They looked exactly like I imagined grandparents should look. Kind faces, warm smiles, and eyes that crinkled with laughter. I had the photo framed and put it on the mantel in the living room. One afternoon, about 6 months after moving in, I was working in the garden, trying to restore it to the beauty Thomas had once maintained. Dorothy came over with lemonade and sat with me on the porch swing. "You look happy, dear," she said. "I am," I realized with surprise. For the first time in a really long time, I'm actually happy. Grace and Thomas would be so proud of you. They'd love knowing you came back here, that you're making this house a home again. I thought about my foster parents, Richard and Patricia, who'd asked me to leave without a second thought. And I thought about Grace and Thomas, who'd loved me for 6 months 20 years ago and never forgot me. About my mother, who'd fought so hard to keep me safe even after she was gone. "Family isn't always about blood," I said. "No, it's not," Dorothy agreed. "It's about who shows up, who stays, who loves you even when it's hard." That spring, I started fostering. A little girl named Sophie, age 5, who'd been removed from her home and needed somewhere safe to land. She was scared and angry and didn't trust anyone, which I understood completely. On her first night, I showed her to the bedroom that had once been mine during those 6 months with Grace and Thomas. I'd painted it a soft yellow and filled it with books and toys. "This is your room," I told her, "for as long as you need it to be." "Will you send me away?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I knelt down to her level. "Not unless you want to go somewhere else, or someone who loves you is able to take care of you. But while you're here, you're safe, you're loved, and you matter." She didn't believe me yet, but that was okay. Grace and Thomas had taught me that love is patient, that showing up every day, being consistent and kind, is what builds trust. 6 months later, Sophie's aunt was approved for custody, and Sophie went to live with family who wanted her. It was bittersweet. I'd grown to love her, but I was also happy she'd found her people. The day after she left, I received a letter from Richard and Patricia. It was short asking if I was doing okay and mentioning that they sometimes wondered about me. I didn't respond. They'd made their choice, and I'd made mine. I wasn't angry anymore, just indifferent. They'd been a place I'd stayed, not a home I'd belonged to. Instead, I wrote a letter to Grace and Thomas, even though they were gone. I told them about finding the house, about reading their letter, about the life I was building in the home they'd given me. I told them about Sophie and about my plans to keep fostering, to give other kids the same chance they'd given me. I sealed the letter and buried it in the garden under the rose bush that Thomas had planted, the one that bloomed every summer in brilliant red. That evening, I sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset and thinking about the journey that had brought me here. From my mother's death to the foster system, from Richard and Patricia's cold dismissal to a lawyer's mysterious phone call, from a cryptic sentence to a blue house that remembered me. My mother had known exactly what she was doing with that one sentence. She'd known that I'd be smart enough to solve the puzzle, brave enough to follow the clues, and desperate enough for a connection to not give up. She'd led me home. The blue house on Maple Street remembered me, and now, finally, I remembered it too. Thank you so much for listening to Maya's story. If it touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps me continue sharing these stories of resilience and unexpected hope. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever discovered something about your past that changed everything? Have you found your own version of home in an unexpected place? Share your story below and tell me, what's the most important lesson you're taking from Maya's journey? Click on one of the 2 stories on your screen for another incredible tale of discovery and belonging. Until next time, remember that home isn't always where you start. Sometimes it's where you return to.